Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Janice Clayton. I have spoken here before with this lovely group, the Literature Circle of First Presbyterian Church. I'm a retired English teacher, so again, it's a pleasure to be here with you to discuss Anne Patchett's 2019 novel entitled The Dutch House. Anne Patchett has written another spectacular novel that, because of her smooth and elegant style, perhaps a style that might even seem too smooth, her concerns with what she calls cultural moments, such as feminism and American materialism, she's written another great novel. This novel, like her earlier novel, Commonwealth, deals with the American family, which the great Arthur Miller, the great American dramatist, said when asked what is the proper subject, what is the best subject for American literature. His reply was the American family. And that is what we have here with The Dutch House. Let me read from a passage in The Dutch House. These are the words of Danny, who is the first person narrator in the novel. There is no story of the prodigal mother. The rich man didn't call for a banquet to celebrate the return of his erstwhile wife. The sons, having stuck it out for all these years at home, did not hang garlands on the doorways, kill the sheep, bring forth the wine. When she left, she killed them all, each in his own way. And now, decades later, they didn't want her back. They knew she was coming and they didn't want her back. So reads a decisive passage from Dutch House. Anne Patchett said in 2012, "You're in one family and it's not your choice, and you're in another family and it's not your choice, and you can't get out." And you can't get out. One critic in the New York Times, Margaret Southgate, stated that The Dutch House has echoes of a fairy tale. And yes, she's right. That's what I thought when I read the novel for the first time. This is a fairy tale. The fairy tale goes like this. Once upon a time, there was a beautiful and fair maiden named Maeve. Maeve and her little brother Danny lived in a beautiful castle that neighbors called the Dutch House, because the house had been created and built by a very wealthy family, the Van Hobecks, who had made their fortune in the United States on cigarettes. Cyril, the father of Maeve and Danny, had purchased the house after he began to create a fortune in real estate. Without asking his wife, Elna, whom he released from a convent, without asking Elna, he took her to the house and presented it to her. To Cyril's surprise, Elna, the mother of Maeve and Danny, didn't want the house. It was too extravagant. But they lived in the house until Elna could take it no longer, and she went to India to help the poor. Now, I call this part one of the fairy tale because this part of the fairy tale involves the portrait. Elna refused to have her portrait painted and hung in the hall, the Great Hall, with the Dutch family. And so Maeve's portrait was painted. And you have the novel, and you know how great this cover is. What a beautiful painting of Maeve, our little hero in the novel. Maeve's name is a name for a warrior queen. And you notice she's wearing red, so think about what the red coat suggests. After the portrait incident, Elna leaves for India, and Danny and Maeve are left alone with Maeve, the little mother. They are cared for by their fairy godmothers, the housekeepers, Jocelyn and Sandy. Not much interaction with the father except for Danny and Cyril, who go out to collect the rents. So that is a close association that Danny has with his father, but Maeve, just a girl. A deep sleep falls upon Maeve when Elna leaves, and Maeve nearly dies. But with the care of the fairy godmothers, Jocelyn and Sandy, she does recover, but she is treated for diabetes. More darkness falls in section 1 of the fairy tale because enter the cruel stepmother, Andrea, and her 2 daughters, who become the stepsisters of Danny and Maeve. This takes us to all of the cruel stepmother stories, but also the orphan stories that you are familiar with. For example, think of Jane Eyre. Andrea takes Maeve's beautiful bedroom with the window seat and gives it to her daughter and banishes Maeve to a small upstairs bedroom. More darkness, more problems in this fairy tale. Cyril, the father, dies. Andrea assumes his business and the house. Danny and Maeve are left with nothing except a trust fund for Danny's education. Again, remember, Maeve is just a girl. Maeve continues in her love and care of Danny. She is the little mother for Danny, pushing Danny forward in his development as a boy, as a student, as a young man. And now we go to part 2 of the fairy tale, where Danny involves himself in a long educational process, culminating in his study of medicine at Columbia University in New York City. He is helped by a kindly professor whose name is so beautifully created, I think, Dr. Abel. All along, Danny's heart is ice. He does find a beautiful girlfriend whom he ultimately marries, but his heart is closed against his mother. Again, darkness descends. This is part 3 of the fairy tale, and Maeve suffers a heart attack. Danny rushes to the cardiac care unit, finds an old woman in the cardiac care unit, and of course you know who it is. It's his mother Elna, come back after years to be with the family and to take care of Maeve. Elna and Maeve go back to the past again and again, remembering their beautiful, joyful days when they lived a simple life. Maeve rejoices in those memories. Danny is more or less a bystander, but he begins to forgive his mother also. Now we move forward to the final episode of the fairy tale. Elna decides that they must go to the Dutch house, which Danny and Maeve have stopped going to. They used to go there regularly and sit outside the house and smoke cigarettes, cementing their grief at rejection, but also cementing their relationship with each other. They go to the house, and what do they find? All 3 of them, Elna, Maeve, and Danny. They find Andrea, the cruel stepmother, who now has some sort of Alzheimer's and who is in need of care, although she has care 24/7. Her own daughter is a physician, but her daughter hates her because I think of Andrea's materialism. Elna forces Maeve and Danny into a kind of caring relationship as they are there in the house with Andrea, and this is great, I think. Danny allows Andrea to hug him, and I think we see the warming of Danny's emotions. The ice in his heart is melting, but Maeve fulfills a prophecy uttered by Cyril that if Elna came back, Maeve would die. Now, what's happening here? Maeve begins to understand, I think, as she sees her mother throwing herself into taking care of the cruel stepmother. Maeve begins to see that their memories of perfection perhaps are not reality, they are not true. Maeve takes the portrait out of the house, and I think this is a great move on the writer's part in this fairy tale. Takes the portrait out of the house. Then Maeve dies. She's like 57. Danny's 47, a little older than that, really. And the fairy tale moves forward, finally, to a happy ending. But how is this story more than a fairy tale? One way is, as I think I've already mentioned, through Patchett's fabulous style. She creates characters whom we care about. That's the problem, I guess, if you'll call it that. That's the problem with the fairy tale. The characters in fairy tales are stereotypes. But in Ann Patchett's characterizations, her people are flesh and blood and alive. And as I say, she teaches us to care about the characters. How does she do this? In her style. Well, her style is simple and elegant. She's got a style of writing, and I think you all will agree with me, that is crystal clear and simple, and at the same time, I'll use the word again, elegant. What's another element in the style of Ann Patchett that creates this great book? It's her allusions, and pardon my Texas drawl here, I'm saying allusions. Her allusions, for example, her allusions to orphan literature. It expands our experience of the novel. We think of Jane Eyre, that I've already mentioned. We think of Huckleberry Finn. We think of High Wind in Jamaica. We think of Donna Tartt's novel, 2018 novel, I think that's when it was written, called The Goldfinch. Maybe you all have dealt with that. And we also think of Charles Dickens. This is the 150th anniversary of Dickens' death. But we think of all of his orphan stories. And Ann Patchett is moving with this tide of what do children do who are abandoned emotionally? How do they survive? Well, I think in Patchett's novels, to a great extent, they raise themselves. What is another allusion in her novel? Here's my pillow that I really didn't think I'd be bringing to a lecture, but look at it. Here's a beautiful picture, a pillow, and the Virgin Mary is in red. Now she's probably purple, that's a suggestion of blue, but notice she's wearing red. What color is Maeve's coat? Red. What are the suggestions of red? Well, blood, suffering, consecration. Maybe you're thinking as I am, Pentecost, when people who spoke many languages came together and understood, reconciliation, in other words. So with colors, Patchett expands the world of her novel. I'm sure there are other fabulous allusions in this work. I think it's a religious or spiritual work, as is brought out in the references to color and to name. For example, think of Danny's name, Danny. Did you think of Daniel in the lion's den? Who, because of his steadfastness to God, was protected from the lions. He was guarded by angels. Danny in this novel, because of Maeve and the fairy godmothers, is also guarded by angels. He's also guarded by his beautiful wife Celeste, who finally asked him for a divorce. And we learn in the novel, why does she ask him for a divorce according to Danny? Because after Maeve died, she began to realize Danny's faults. And let me say right here, this novel is available through Audible. And it's narrated, the speaker, the narrator, Danny character is Tom Hanks. I think that would be a delightful time to hear Tom Hanks read this novel. But now, let's go to the end of the novel and sum up the cultural moments that Patchett brings into this work. I'm quoting her when she says she deals with cultural moments. I think this is the theme of the work, themes, plural, of the work. her characterization of cultural moments. First of all, the novel takes place from like 1946 through 1986, more or less 40 years. So during this time, we have the evolution of feminism, Betty Friedan, for example. And you see the beginning of the novel, how Elna, the mother, is dominated by the husband. When she leaves, he pays her back big time. What's another cultural moment in the novel? It's the conflict, and it is a very American conflict, although of course it's universal, it's archetypal. The conflict between materialism and the love of others, compassionate love. This begins with Jamestown and the Puritans in Salem. And this struggle between our love of things and our love of God continues today. Let's go to the end of the novel. What happens at the end of the novel? Is the ending of the novel too happy? Is it too happy, shall I say? Is it too unrealistic? May, Danny's daughter, the daughter of Danny and Celeste, who is named for Maeve, becomes a movie star. A beautiful, thin, dark woman like Maeve. And May reclaims the house, and in the final scenes of the novel gives this wonderful party that you and I would certainly like to attend, filled with beautiful things and beautiful people. Danny sees all of this going on and sees Maeve sitting in a shadow. Remember, all the time the darkness descends in the fairy tale. Sees May, M-A-Y, sitting in a shadow, and he walks over to her and he realizes that May has become the fulfillment of all of Maeve's joy in the family. He sees his daughter sitting in the darkness, wearing what looked to be a white slip covered in pearls. Nay is a princess. "My God, I love this so much," May said. "It's your house," said Danny. She smiled. "Even in the darkness, you could have seen it." "Good," she said. "Take me inside." I think this is a happy ending. It's a happy ending of rebirth and regeneration for Danny. I think it shows the steadfastness of May's love and how that love regenerates and makes a beautiful relationship for Danny and his daughter. Mother Elna is out in the cold, still taking care of Andrea. So, friends, here are my thoughts, my concluding thoughts for you all today. Thank you. I know these are such hard times for all of us. We're approaching Thanksgiving and we want to be with our families. But we know that God is with us, and I'm going to take us to Danny and this wonderful story that is associated with his name, Daniel in the Lion's Den. I think Patchett wants us to think of this. Daniel 6:26. You remember what's happened to Daniel, of course. For he is a living God, enduring forever, ever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed, and his dominion shall be to no end. So thank you, everybody. It's great to be with you. I know I've said that once. Here's a great article written by Ann Patchett, October 5th, 2020. My Three Fathers shows her love of family, but also her understanding of how families can hurt each other and how we can forgive each other. So, happy Thanksgiving and best wishes.